was miraculous. But at the time we were living it, it wasn't miraculous. It was day by day, and sometimes I thought, we're not getting anywhere, meeting in this little building, being the laughing stock of the shore. And I'm going to tell you, there are some times when I thought, I must have been crazy to leave my career with the state and follow this, what seemed to be an elusive dream. And I'll tell you, sometimes I was discouraged, and sometimes I was down, and sometimes I was nearly broken. And like many pastors, every Monday morning, if I'd had somewhere else to go, I probably would have gone, but I had nowhere else to go. That's why I stayed here as long as I did. But I'm saying that to say this. You know, that I'm being honest with you. That's the way a man feels. And just because you're able to do something doesn't make you a man of steel. And it was true with Paul. There were times when Paul was so overcome with fear and with discouragement that the Bible says the angel of the Lord would appear to him, minister unto him, or the Lord Jesus himself would stand by him and encourage him. Don't worry now, Paul, nobody's going to hurt you in this city. It was dangerous in those days to travel and do the things that he did, and it remains so today. But Paul, when he came to Corinth, was in a weakened condition, and he testifies that he came with fear and much trembling. Now what that tells me is that Paul was not a super being. He was made of the same stuff that you and I are. You know, when he's writing in 1 Corinthians in chapter 1, and since we're already there, I'm going to read these verses, verse 26 and following. He says, "For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the mighty." And this seems to be the pattern that God has followed down through the years of time. It was said of Moses that Moses was the meekest man on earth. And yet Moses is revered as the great leader of the Exodus as God brought the Jews out of bondage down in Egypt land. We read about the exploits of Samson, and someone said concerning Samson that he probably looked something like the action figures of today, with muscles bulging out all over his body, and probably a little taller than the average. He could grab the gates of the city and take hold of that thing and just carry it to the top of the hill. He could tear down pillars. He could fight 1,000 men and whip them with the jawbone of an ass. He could take a lion by upper jaw and lower jaw and literally rend him in pieces. And many believe that Samson did that because he had great muscles. I would imagine if you saw Samson, he would look just like any other man. You see, the secret to Samson was not his physical agility and ability. The secret to Samson was God. And the secret to Moses was God. And the secret to Paul was God. Paul was prone to the same things that you and I are. And yet Paul did what he did in the power of God. He did not depend upon himself. And you and I need to realize that today. When I notice this, I see that Paul didn't use modern tactics. Now, I'm sure that Pastor Jim went to a good school because he went to Hyles-Anderson. I've thought about this young man's credentials. I know he came from a good family, saved at the age of 9. I heard that on the tape, so I know he was saved at the age of 9. He went to one of the most outstanding Christian schools in the country. Brother Tom Berry, who pastored Baptist Bible, who was head of Elkton Christian Schools, Brother John Balker. Both these men were friends of mine. I knew the school, many of the staff members, the faculty well. Elkton Christian School is one of the best schools in the country for Christian school. Hyles-Anderson, academically, I'm not sure where it would measure up with some of the others, but I know one thing for sure, it's as good, if not better, than anything you're going to find in the country. And to come out of a good school like Elkton Christian School, and out of Hyles-Anderson, and from a good family and saved at the age of 9, this young fellow has some good credentials. And you are very fortunate to have him for your pastor. I've heard him preach, and you're very fortunate. You've had some good preaching around here in days going by. But anyway, as he went to school, I'm confident that he was taught as we were when we went to school, that if you're going to get into church planting, you needed to go to an area where there was a need. One of the best ways of establishing a need is to visit all the local pastors and ask them what they thought. What do you think about a new church in this area? Does this church need another independent, fundamental, Bible-believing, Bible-preaching church? Well, that may work for some folk. If I'd done that here, I guarantee you there would be no Baptist Bible church. If I'd gone to the local ministerial association and began to question, listen, I have done that. I remember one place we were considering founding a new church, and I went to several of the outstanding pastors in different towns, fundamental men, good men, and I asked them, well, we don't need anything around here. Really don't need anything within 100 miles of here, but I can tell you, somewhere out there in Timbuktu, there's a need. Well, if Paul had done that, there would have been no work established in Corinth, but then he didn't do that. Paul didn't take a poll among the local people. Now, we didn't go door to door down here handing out flyers and asking the people, do you think that there should be a Baptist Bible church? Real quickly, I'll take this moment to tell you why this church came into existence. Some of you know that I pastored for a short period of time at a little Southern Baptist church down here called Holly's Baptist Church. I came to shore as a police officer from an independent Baptist background, but there were no independent Baptist churches on the shore. And the state encouraged us to be involved in local churches, and I said, well, I'd be better off to go to a Southern Baptist church than not to go to church at all. So I began to go, and as I did, they found out that I had prepared for the ministry prior to entering the state police, and they began to use me throughout the area in preaching, and in the process, I got right with God. Amen. And Little Holly's Baptist Church was running about 35 people out there in the boondocks, and nobody much going to it. And so they had me in 5 Sundays in a row to preach. And in the process of time, I got right with God. I mean, I've been running from the Lord because I knew God wanted me preaching, but I wanted to be a state trooper. I was a pilot as well, and it was very easy back in those days to fly and be a pilot for the state. And so that was my dream, that was my goal, that's what I wanted to do. But God got my heart, I got right with God, and I resigned my position with the state, and I took Holly's Church. Well, we had to practice what I'd been taught, soul winning. I took Brother Heil's course, and Let's Go Soul Winning so many times, I had it memorized. And we just went out and began to knock on doors, and souls began to get saved, and that attendance jumped in about 2 months from 35 to 125. On one occasion, in Only Baptist Church, and I didn't think anything of this. We've been getting folks saved, and we had 42. They were all adults except one child, I think, maybe a junior. And had 42 folks to line up and baptize that morning. And brother, I forget the pastor's name who was there, he had 2 to baptize. And when we went there, I was used to having all the congregation cleared out so we could come and baptize. But I went in there, and when I went down to baptistry, I looked out, and the church was full. And the pastor, he baptized his 2 and turned it over to us. And I remember we kept going through that, and when it was over, he got up and he said, you know, brother, he said, I feel like the ant riding the elephant across the bridge. And saying to him, brother, we're really shaking this thing, aren't we? Well, it began to grow, and many more people were saved. And but I found after 9 months that I was not going to be able to stay there. And so my intention was to resign that position and to leave the shore. I was going back into law enforcement elsewhere. But there were so many people that had been saved, and they began to say to me, now, brother, where are we going to go? We're not going to stay here. We're not going to have a church to go to. Where are we going to go? And I began to think, oh me, how can I walk off and leave these people? And I remember riding these back roads around the Eastern Shore, and in my mind, there was this thought. It had never been done since the days of Elijah Baker that an independent Baptist church had been founded, and I certainly never founded it and really wasn't trained to do that. And so I began to think, and God brought me the conviction that it can be done. And in my mind, the idea of the ministry was born of God. And I committed myself and submitted myself to the will of God to do this thing. And as we did, the pieces began to come together. And so it was born somewhat out of necessity. But I didn't take a poll. Paul didn't take a poll at this particular time either. The Bible tells us how that he did it. He went in, he began to speak, he began to preach, and God opened the doors, and God blessed, and a great work was done. Well, now you see there, that is point number C, point number 1. And I had a 7-point outline. I preached one time in the pastor's fellowship at Del Mar, where Brother Johnson's at, and I rushed through it in 45 minutes and barely got started. And Brother Johnson said, when we have a month or two clear, we're going to have Brother Madron back to finish that sermon. Well, when you're pastoring, you get by with that, because I would just say, well, we'll continue this thought next week. Well, maybe on your 50th anniversary, Brother James, will have me back, and we can continue that. But in looking over Paul's ministry, there were so many similarities to what God did in these days, in those days, and what God is doing today. Read these verses and think about it, and I'm certainly God will open it up to you. All right, Pastor, I'm done, and I'm right on time. It's 10 minutes up. I told you I could do it. He told me, Brother Shreve's back there, Brother Wade, and I was somewhat intimidated when I saw he stood much bigger than me, and he drinks more coffee than me, and so I didn't dare go a minute over. So, brother, you stay seated. No need to come and get me. I'm down. Brother Jim, you come.